Let's go ahead and look at the basic form of AJAX. I'm going to go ahead and create a new page. Duck type HTML, HTML, head, title, AJAX, script source equal AJAX.js, and link rel is style sheet. href is AJAX.css. Close off the head. For the body, let me just put a div box, ID equal results. Close the div off. Close the body, and close the HTML. So I'm going to go ahead and in my XAMPP folder, let's view this as details, and I'm going to go to C, XAMPP, htdocs, and let me go to 233W, right click, new folder, week 5, and I'm going to save this as ajax.html, and then create a new file, and I'll save this as ajax.js, and let's console.log hello Ajax, save, and one more new file, save as ajax.css, and I'm going to leave this empty for now. So for my JavaScript, I'm going to create a piece of code that uses Ajax to fetch some content from the web server. And the web page that I'm going to fetch from the server is going to be a PHP script. So the PHP will produce some results, and then those results will be available to my JavaScript code. So let me go ahead and create another new file, and I'm going to call this, let's go ahead and save this as, under week 5, let's call it fetch.php. And I'm going to start with some PHP code. If you don't know PHP, that's okay. I'll sort of explain what I'm doing as I go. Now, parameters that are passed in using get and post from form data are available inside of PHP inside of something called super global variables. So there's one for $get, which is basically an associative array where the keys are the type of value that's passed in. Like if I have name equal mark as a parameter that gets passed in, name is going to be the key in this array, and mark is going to be the value of the array. So let's say, for example, name, and that's going to get the value of name. And here I'm just going to go ahead and echo that value. So it's really simple. And let's go ahead and see how this fetch.php works if I access it directly. So I'm going to go to a browser, and I'm going to go localhost, CIS, 233W, week 5, fetch.php, and since this is using get, I add the arguments after question mark right in the URL. So name equal mark. Accidentally typed a backslash there. Okay, so name equal mark is available inside of $get under the key name. So this actually looks a lot like associative array in JavaScript. Now, this is just loading the page direct, but I can also load the page from JavaScript. So for example, I'm going to create an XML HTTP request object, var XML HTTP request is new XML HTTP request. So now I have an object that has some properties and methods and inherits some methods. So the way I use this object in order to fetch the contents of this page, xhr.open, and then I specify what method I want to use to fetch the results. This can either be get or post. Then the URL I want to fetch, which is going to be localhost CIS233W week 5 fetch.php. And then if I'm using get, I can just go ahead and add the parameters right in the URL, like so. And then the last argument is whether this is handled synchronously or asynchronously. So I'm going to specify synchronously as an example. So false for asynchronous. And then when I hit return, it's going to warn me that synchronous XML HTTP requests on the main thread are deprecated because of its detrimental effects to the end user experience. So what it's really talking about is that the browser uses and JavaScript use a single threaded model of execution. That basically means one core on one processor, one thread of execution, no parallel processing, no multi-threading. It's only doing one thing at a time. And when I execute this open and then fetch data from the backend server, it's going to sit there and that thread of execution is going to wait until the data comes back over the network. And backend web server has to finish processing the page before the results can even be sent. That might involve looking in a database. Can be really expensive operation. And during all the time where this thing is trying to fetch results and is waiting for the results to come in, that thread of execution can't be doing things like handling user input on the browser. I can't even type stuff into form fields or scroll while that thread is locked up and waiting. So synchronous requests tend to have a detrimental effect on the user experience because your browser is just going to go away until the data comes back. Now, as an alternative, what you want to do is use an asynchronous request, but that's a little more complicated. So we'll talk about that in a second. So the first step was I opened a request. Then I actually want to send the request to the web server. So xhr.send. And since this is synchronous, I know when it returns from the send that I got my results. And the results are going to be in xhr.response. So there's my response. Just like when I fetched it from the web server, that was my response. Here, I have the response under a response property of XHR. Now this may be text, or it may be some other type of data, maybe a collection of DOM objects. And so if I want to see it as text, there's also a property called xhr.response text, which has the same data if this is a piece of text. So okay, so far this is just sending a word back, but I can also send a JavaScript object in JSON notation. So what I'm going to do is, instead of just echoing get, I'm going to encode the whole get array using JSON encode PHP function, and I'm going to save it. And then if I go to the browser and hit reload, now I see a JSON notation for an object with a name property and the value mark. So let me go ahead and repeat that AJAX command. So open, oops, I hit reload, so I have to make a new XHR. And then I'm going to open it, and I'm going to send it, and then I'm going to look at the response text. So here's a piece of text that's a JSON encoded object. If I call JSON.parse xhr.response text, that returns a JavaScript object with a name property. And in fact, let me open another one using the same connection. I'm going to add some additional arguments. Last name is Goodman and job equal instructor and course equal CIS %20 233W. So now if I send and then JSON parse the response, now I have an object with multiple properties. So using JavaScript object notation is really easy to send objects from the backend web server to the front-end browser. So now let's hook this up to our project. And what I want to do is, let me go to my AJAX.html. And I already have a response box here, but I want to have a button to kick this thing off. So I'm going to go ahead and before the results box, I'm going to add button name equal fetch. And we'll attach an ID to it as well. And then in my JavaScript, I'm going to wait for the window to be loaded. So on load event, I'm going to go ahead and get that button, which I called fetch button. So here's where I put my AJAX code. So let's go ahead and create an XML HTTP request object. And then we'll open that. Get method, localhost, CIS233W, week 5, fetch.php, question, name is Mark, and last name is Goodman, and job is instructor, and course is CIS %20, which is URL encoded space 233W. So there's my URL, and I'll continue using Synchronous for now, so false for async. Then I'm going to send the request, and when I get to this line, I have my response. So response is xhr dot, let's go ahead and JSON parse xhr dot response text. So now I have an object. Let's display it in the results box. So I'm going to build some HTML, and we'll start with a table, and then we'll add a header row, key, value. So there's my header row. And then for key in response, HTML plus equals table row, table data, plus key plus end that cell, start a new cell, plus response subkey, plus end that cell, end the row. And then to finish it off, I'll close off my table. And finally, I'll store the HTML in the response table, in the results table. So when I run this code, reload, I have a button. Oh, let's try, I forgot my name, so let's try it now. So now I have a fetch button. If I hit fetch, it went out to the server, it fetched this data, then it formatted and displayed it. And if I look at the network tab, let me hit reload. So when I load, I get my ajax.html, and then that loads ajax.js and ajax.css. And now it's basically just sitting here not doing anything. So I'm going to go ahead and click the fetch button, and that causes a new request. So here's the request. You see the URL is being sent, just like any other GET request, method GET. Then the response status was 200, meaning that it worked successfully. Here's the response headers that PHP sends back. And then if I look at the response, here's a string that represents a JSON object.